flavor for your ear. Epic Spotlight. Putting the spotlight on positive goings on the real people that have chosen a real path. The who's, the whys, and the hows are being shared and given to you.
And we're back, and we got another one. But before we get going, we got to take care of some housekeeping notes. This episode today is sponsored by Epic Mortgage. Whether you're buying, refinancing, or investing, call Epic today. That's 708-905-5300. That's 708-905-5300. It's your dreams, your goals. Let's plan together. Now on with the show. Today we have Paula Jenkins. Paula has made a remarkable impact on her clients with testimonials highlighting her unique ability to challenge thinking while demonstrating deep understanding and compassion. With over 2 decades of leadership experience in the HR outsourcing and benefits industry, Paula has worked with numerous Fortune 500 companies before establishing her own consulting firm. Currently, Paula is working on a book that explores the essence of authentic leadership and living. Her mission is simple but powerful: to change the world one conversation at a time, improving leadership dynamics, fostering financial success, and cultivating inclusive cultures. Welcome, Paula Jenkins.
Thank you so much for having me.
Hey, thanks for being on the show. So let's get right into it. What inspired you to start LFS Consulting?
Yeah, 2 numbers, 180 and 140. More specifically, 180 over 140. That was my blood pressure back in October of 2017. And my doctor said to me, if you don't change your work environment, you're going to die. It was that clear, that simple, and very transparent. And what I realized was I was in a very toxic work environment. And the manager that I had at the time, we just were not on the same page. And so within 3 months of that conversation, I left. And was not easy because it was my corporate career and it was great, but it was important. And so I left to start my business and focus on 2 passions that I have: financial literacy and leadership development. And I'll tell you, the inspiration really came from, I just didn't want anybody else to go through what I've gone through. My story is not necessarily unique. There are a lot of people who have been in toxic work environments, but honestly, everybody doesn't make it out. And so I really, when I talk about being inspired to do what I do day in and day out, it is to make sure that we create better leaders out here. And I think that's the really important piece that keeps me going every day. It's those 2 numbers.
Oh, that's awesome. And obviously that story resonates. I mean, with a lot of people, especially in some of these corporate jobs. They are high, stressful jobs with a lot of demand and pulling of your time. And so the balancing of work life and just regular life, it's very hard to even, 60-40 is even hard.
Right.
So how have you seen you really change as a leader, from starting your company to now?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think from a philosophy perspective, the biggest thing that I think for me is I've always been an empathetic leader. That I do know, but I have become even more empathetic. I understand the power of putting yourself in somebody else's shoes. I understand when we take a moment and listen. I have this mantra that I talk about now is everything begins and ends with communication. And it really does. And I think too often we are in environments that we don't listen to each other. We don't take the time to get to know each other. And so while I was a very empathetic leader, I'm even more empathetic now. And I've always asked, what's the most important, skill? And I do say empathy, because I think so many of us, and let's be clear, coming out of the pandemic, we are handling a lot of things, and we were tested. And so for me, I've grown just in terms of listening. A lot of times I will say, everybody has a story, everybody. And everybody's not going to share their story with you. But if you take the time to get to know people, maybe they will, then you'll understand where they're coming through. So coming from. So I know for me, my growth really comes from just being more empathetic.
Oh, that's awesome. And I resonate with that. Obviously, I always have a saying too that, 2 people could be speaking English, but still don't understand each other. And
Yes.
I've seen it happen far too often. And sometimes it's just an explanation that will clear things up, clear the air, make people understand what's going on. But it's
Come
like,
on.
so many people are rushed, hurry, hurry, hurry. They don't take
Yep.
that extra time to make that understanding. And so it leaves for me to kind of have my own perception. And then
Yep.
my own perception becomes my reality, and that may not be the reality of the situation. So
Spot on.
I
Couldn't have said it better.
no, I understand what you're saying. No, you hit
Yep.
home. So now
Yeah.
you emphasize authentic leadership. How do you kind of define what authentic leadership is, and what does that mean to you?
Yeah. So here's what I'll say. Authentic leadership is about being true to who you are, true to yourself and your values. And a lot of times I will tell people we all have different values. But not only do we have different values, the other piece of this is when you're being authentic is make sure you're fostering an environment of trust, of respect around those who you are working with. I think so often we don't do that. And when you're leading authentically, one of the things you have to do is you have to understand and communicate your own style. So that's the first part because we're all different. But that also means knowing your strengths. It means knowing your weaknesses. But it also means being open to feedback and growth. I say it all the time. I'm not a perfect being. And so my authenticity is recognizing who I am. And a lot of times I will literally say, I am unapologetically Paula. That does not mean I'm perfect. It does not mean I can't grow. What it means, I am who I am, and I don't apologize for that. But by understanding who I am, I'm actually better equipped to lead in a way that aligns with who I am, my values, and my goals.
Oh, that's great. As far as you've worked with Fortune 500 companies, what are some common challenges that are you seeing that leaders are facing in these bigger companies?
Well, I'll tell you, the first one is lack of clear communication. I think one of the things that we just aren't good with is communicating. And I know there's lots of reasons why that happens. It can be we feel like we can't share everything, which I get, but we also sometimes are afraid of communication. And what we don't understand is that is the biggest piece you can do in any organization is make sure you're communicating frequently and authentically. The other piece is lack of trust. We don't trust each other. I think in organizations, for some reason, we are all out for ourselves. And I know where some of that comes from, but I think what happens is when we're talking about leadership and some of the challenges, you got to make sure that you trust the people that you're working with. That means the leaders, but also those who are working for you. And I'm going to just go back to what we just talked about, the lack of authenticity. I think a lot of times what happens is we show up in a way that, I'll be honest, doesn't align to our values. And I think that is where we get off track. And if we stuck to the values of ourselves and even the values of the organization, I think we'd be in a much better place. And I think a lot of times what's happened in these organizations is we say we're going to walk the walk, but we're not talking the talk. And I think that's the problem is we just aren't doing what we say we're going to do.
Well said. Now, obviously, you have a consulting firm and you're working with these leaders. What are some of the methods and training things that one could expect to be, that encompasses what you offer?
Good question. So the first thing is, I talk about leadership from a place of it's about service. It's not control. So a lot of times what happens is when we think about leadership, and I do tell people, leadership is not necessarily about the title. You can be a leader from any seat that you sit in. And I think sometimes what happens when we get a certain title, we lose the real power, which is the servant piece of it. I'm a believer that great leaders actually inspire by example. I'm actually kind of known as the live by example speaker. That is kind of my title. You have to focus on self-awareness. And so I work with my clients around emotional intelligence and understanding the power of knowing what your self-awareness is. And by doing so, how to be very clear about their communication style. I also teach them how to empower others, through trust, through delegation. One of the things I have learned personally is leaders don't micromanage. They actually uplift and they create opportunities for others. And then the last piece is really developing a really great mindset that focuses on long-term success. I think a lot of times we don't get that. One of the mantras that I have is I say true leaders create more leaders. And you do that by investing in the potential of their teams and fostering an environment where everyone can actually thrive. And so those are kind of some of the components that I focus on with honestly all of my clients. And whether it's a workshop, whether it's coaching, it's all those things.
No, that's awesome. And one thing I didn't talk about in your bio, but you are a certified diversity, equity, and inclusion trainer. So I was curious, just as far as how do organizations go about fostering that type of culture within, maybe they don't have it right now. How do they foster that type of culture?
We're in a very unique environment right now. Let me start by saying that. And here's what I will say. It really starts with understanding that every single one of us has biases. Every single one of us, and especially unconscious ones. And so you have to start there. If you're really going to talk about inclusive cultures, you gotta start there. We also have to understand that, DEI, and diversity, equity, inclusion, is leadership. One of the things that I have found is we try to separate it as if it's some anomaly. It's not. It is leadership. We're talking about just basic respect. It's also listening and don't make assumptions. I think a lot of decisions are made because we assume. I think one of the worst things we can do is when somebody has children, right? And we don't give opportunities to them because they have children. Never ask them a question. We never present the opportunity. That's a problem. We don't look around our table and say, wow, everybody is the same age. Where's the diversity in age? Wow, everybody is the same gender. So there's all these pieces. I know a lot of times people get so caught up in it's black or white. No, diversity, equity, inclusion is about so much more than that. And I think if organizations really understood that, we'd been in a much better position right now. And it wouldn't be about checking the box. One of the things that I tell people in organizations is do the real work. Do the real work. Don't make it just about let me check a box, let me do this workshop, let me bring this one person. No, truly be clear about what this looks like. And remember that DEI is leadership.
It's funny because the country is a country of immigrants.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
I mean, the whole concept, it seems like it's so basic, that we all just have to learn to understand each other, one another, and be respectful, manners,
Exactly.
and
Exactly.
just different cultures all figuring it out together.
Together. Exactly.
So now, currently, you are working on a book about
I
authentic leadership. Um,
am.
can you give the audience a little bit of a preview and when is it expected to come out?
Yeah. So one of the things that I have learned is as I have been on my own journey, whether it has been in corporate America or, obviously leaving and starting my own business, is I have tried to be as authentic as I possibly can in all aspects of my life. And I've recognized that a lot of times we may be authentic in one area, but not in others. And I'm pretty proud that in most cases I'm pretty authentic. And so the book is really going to be about how to live and lead authentically. And I'll break down all these different components, whether it's financially authentic, whether it's relationships, whether it's work, whether it's how we show up on social media, and really breaking down, like, honestly, we would all be much better and live better lives if we understood the power of our authenticity. And I know that word is used a lot of times and for many reasons. And we can say whether good or bad, but I'm coming from a place of I don't want us to be afraid of being authentic. Instead, I want us to embrace it and show up as who you are and own it. And again, I'm gonna go back to what I said earlier. It doesn't mean we're perfect beings. So authenticity doesn't mean if I'm a butthole, that's the way I'm going to show up all the time. No, recognize you are and understand that you can grow, you can be better. And I think that's the piece that I think too often we don't understand is no matter who we are, we absolutely can show up in a different light. And that's what I want to focus on. In terms
That's
of when
great.
it's coming out, my hope and prayer is in 2025, and hopefully in the first quarter.
That'd be great. I'm looking forward to reading it. And as we wrap up, obviously from, I'm a business owner. I run a company. What are some things that I could, start to move in the right direction to try to improve my skills as a leader?
Ooh, good question. So I think the big thing is I'll go back to my wonderful, quote, everything begins and ends with communication. So first, you got to master your communication. I think that leadership, it really does begin with how you effectively connect with whether it's a team, your clients, your stakeholders. the community. Listening and adapting your style to different audiences is key. I think too often what happens is people say, well, this is who I am and they just have to adapt to me. No, adapt to who you're talking to. It goes a long way. That's where we have to start, is understanding that this communication piece, it's not just about you, it's about who you're talking to. The second thing is I would probably say is self-awareness. Emotional intelligence, I know we call it a soft skill, and I just say, no, it's a skill. It's one of those things where you understand what your strengths are and honestly where you need to grow, whether that is emotionally, strategically, whatever it may be. But when you have the self-awareness of what you need to work on and what you're good at, especially as an entrepreneur, I'm telling you, then you start understanding I need to get help for certain things, but I'm going to focus on what I do well. And that is the best kind of self-awareness. And then honestly, actually, the last thing is really, as I don't do as much of the financial literacy part as I used to, but it's still important. It's important in our decision making. It's understanding the financial health of your organization, of the decisions that you're making. Is it based off of data? The decisions that we make that align with your vision and what you're trying to do in your business, because we all want to create that obviously sustainable growth and success. And at the end of the day, I'll continue to say this, just remember, everything begins and ends with communication. And so reminding yourself that whether we're talking, writing, our body language, our tone, it matters no matter who you're talking to.
That's awesome. No, I really appreciate you coming on today and explaining that. Leadership is very important. Communication is very important, and really appreciate you and want you to have an epic day.
Thank you so much, Dr. This was wonderful.
The who's, the whys, and the hows are being shared and given to you. Epic Spotlight, baby. A new flavor.